Good afternoon, or good morning for some of you. This is Linda Janak speaking. I am so pleased to be here with you today. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule to sit with me and hear about the 5 strategies to conquer your performance management program. A little bit about me. I am the president and CEO of Talent Guard. We are a full-service talent management software company, and we also, the way we got our roots is we got started in talent management consulting and kind of evolved to a software company. I'm the author of Fake Perfection, which is a book about career transition, and also the professional and career management coaching system. And I'm excited to be here. Today we're going to be talking about a case study in the technology industry, and if you've been with me before, you know that I kind of build these highly engaging interactive presentations that really walk you through a visual representation of the case study. In addition to that, I will be sending this presentation, the recorded version will be available on the website by the end of the day, but we will send an email out letting you know that it's available for download. And in addition to that, if you have any questions, please feel free to chat them to me as we go throughout the presentation so that you don't lose your thought. But what we'll do is at the end we'll have a Q&A where I'll try to answer any questions that you have about the topic that we discussed today. So I'd like to get started. I'd like you to meet Joel. Joel is the CEO of what we call Techie Central. That's a fictitious name for the company. A little bit about Techie Central. They are a social media platform company. They are privately held. This is Joel's first time being a CEO of a technology company. His background was in sales prior to that for technology companies. Over the past several years, the company got started in 2008. That's when the company was founded. And they've since grown to about 700 employees and about 300 customers. Most of the business that they do today is in the United States, but they are looking to expand that. So interestingly enough, as they started in the market within the social media space, the organization has since, in 2013, see some of the market dynamics changing on them. So if we think about how this company got started, it was an entrepreneurial endeavor. They were an early innovator, so they were kind of first to market with a really cool, disruptive technology. At that time, the company was mainly focused on how do I build a customer base. They had a single product offering because they needed to be focused to get out to market. And they were totally thinking about how do I disrupt the market with technology that will change how business gets done, and they did that successfully. But in that startup environment, if you've ever been in one, it requires a certain employee type. People who have been in startups before, people who have taken things from concept to launch to a mature company. It requires a lot of entrepreneurial spirit, risk-taking, those sorts of characteristics or competencies, if you will. But as the market started to change, the company had experienced trouble with losing customers, employees starting to leave the organization, which is a natural evolution when your company starts to grow. But they were starting to grow as a mature company, and the focus was moving from some of those early innovator traits to what I call mature company traits, where the focus shifted to customer satisfaction and retention instead of instead of getting the statement of work and closing the deal. It was all about how profitable were the deal and what were the margins on each of the deals, and about scalability. How are we going to handle hundreds of thousands of users across the United States and across the globe with a great level of certainty so that businesses could run their business critical applications. And they required a different competency set. They needed employees who knew how to take the company from where it was to where it needs to go. So if we think about, kind of break it down for a minute and think about the company's internal style, what was happening in the company, especially with Joel, we were thinking about, what they were thinking about and the HR team was thinking about was people inside the company, even though they had grown to a mature company, were really being evaluated and appraised and had goals that were really set for the innovator model. So that was a problem because they needed to mature the model. We needed to have goals that were based on the business model, and those goals needed to be reflected in the competency model so that the organization knew where it was, what it needed to do in terms of hiring for skills so that it could take it to the next level. So what they realized was that their internal performance management system was broken. Why? It's because the goals changed. And they were really focused on the past of where they had been and what made them successful rather than thinking about the future and where the company needed to go. So even though the goals started to change, the performance management system was lagging. And we realized that the performance management system had to change to keep up with the changing goals. And doing it via paper was nearly impossible. Well, why is that? And we'll talk about more reasons, but I think this picture captures it in a great way. Well, as you know, people like to do things their own way. So they had many people using different goal tracking paperwork or templates. Some people were tracking goals, some people weren't. Some people were doing performance appraisals. Some people were not doing performance appraisals. Some managers were great at coaching, some were not. So that was a catalyst for the problem of how do we actually have a seamless approach to drive accountability in the organization, and doing it through paper was very, very difficult. So some specific reasons as it relates to performance management are these. They had in this organization a very static or manual process, and that performance evaluation process was not tied to corporate performance at all. We had, what we had looked at was it was taking, I'm talking hundreds of hours to cascade goals down to the right people. And once we got them cascaded down to the right people, the effort required to manually figure out if the goals were on track was horrendous, as you can imagine when you're doing it on paper. Lots of phone calls, lots of updates, figuring out where we are, lots of team meetings. So it was taking a lot of people just to do something that should have been just a straightforward process. There was limited visibility into how people at any given point were performing against the goals. And there was an infrequent amount of feedback and communication between employees and managers unless we were asking specifically for that data so the executive team could take it into the executive meeting to have a discussion with the CEO about where the business stood. So a better system was needed to set, monitor, and measure performance. What Joel wanted, he wanted 4 questions answered any given time throughout the year. These questions are simple but hard to answer. What is our progress against company goals? What is the probability that we will meet the goal this month, quarter, year, however often you need to track it, or in Joel's case, he had weekly meetings. How are we performing against the goal? And who and what skills must be developed to ensure that we can continue to meet our current goals, and as the goals evolve, how we continue to meet the future goals. So he was not getting the answers to those questions as of the time that we started this process. So we brought Sarah in. She's also known as Miss HR. We call her the HR hero. She's in a lot of our presentations, so you may see a familiar face here. And in light of Joel's needs, what Sarah discovered, obviously, was that it was time to reinvent the process. They had gotten to a point where, as I said, they could no longer manage it on paper, and they needed much more visibility moving forward. So her first start, where she wanted to start, was that she needed to change the conversation internally. Because as you know, you can't just introduce a new process. A process takes change, and a change requires management. So she wanted to start somewhere. And her current conversation I think this bell says a lot. You know, I think she felt a little bit like, boy, she would ring a bell, which was equivalent to sending out an email, and people would go and start filling out Microsoft Word templates to get their performance review done. But kind of the conversation that was happening internally around the water cooler was, yeah, okay, October performance appraisals are coming up. Oh my gosh, how am I going to get this done? Employers are thinking about, how do I get all the information that I need out of my notebook and out of my email from customers to put into this performance appraisal? Managers are thinking about, oh, how am I going to get all this work done? And, you know, fill out all of the reforms and complete them and sign off on them and do everything that I'm supposed to do as a manager to make sure that the process is being followed. So it drives a lot of stress, as you know. And then what would happen is they'd have the one-time, basically review, the performance review and sign-off meeting, and then you know, the managers would then say, well, go develop your career plan. And in many organizations, especially in Techie Central, the career plan was really just a list of training things, items, resources, if you will, that they wanted to take. It didn't really have any tie back to the actual needs of the performance review. So Sarah had to overhaul the outdated annual review to achieve not only Joel's objectives, but the needs of the company going forward. So her solution was to start the new conversation with something very simple, and she likes heuristics like this that she can use to communicate in the form of a marketing campaign and messaging throughout the company, and she called it GAP. Has a lot of innuendos, but what GAP stood for is, or stands for, is goals aligned equals performance. She wanted to elevate that conversation from one of the annual performance review to, we need to figure out what our goals are, how to align them to the right teams, and then how to manage that as a company for performance, not just an HR activity that's being launched one time a year and employees and managers are getting it done, but how do we elevate the conversation up to the next level so that the executives are involved, the CEO is involved, and everybody else is involved, and we're all aligned on the same thing. So you can almost call it corporate performance, if you will. And 5 strategies were required for GAP to work at Techie Central. And let's explore these. 1, we had to have clearly defined goals that could be cascaded to appropriate teams, and those teams or those managers or those departments needed to be able to cascade it down to individuals, and there needed to be transparency and visibility from top down and bottom up. So where are we at? Employees should know, managers should know, and the CEO should know. We needed to have interactive development plans that got started in the beginning of the year and not as an afterthought, a one-time thinking thing, but how can we have a development plan that we're working on and that our managers are engaging with us on throughout the year that allows for feedback, recognition, and constant status updates. We need an interim process to track goal attainment. How are we doing, and what is the probability that we're going to achieve the goals for the quarter, the month, the year? And having a career journal to track all the activities. So when employees, for example, they might be doing a great presentation like this and they want to upload it for their manager to see. Managers might make observations of employees throughout the year, whether it's positive or negative, and either want to share those in an open way or just jot them in a confidential manner, but to have that place so that they can come back to remind them of the things that they thought throughout the year, rather than trying to go back and thinking, oh, there was something I wanted to put, what was it? And then obviously we have to have a final appraisal or sign-out process that represents not just the behaviors or the values, which I find a lot of performance reviews focus on, but the goal attainment and the competencies combined together. Those 5 strategies, if implemented well, will achieve the ultimate outcome, which is a dashboard and reporting to drive accountability and transparency at the organizational and the individual level. So let's talk a little bit about this desired process and how these strategies would be implemented to achieve that ultimate objective. First and foremost, the process has to be linked. If the arm would break out of one of these holds, as you can see here, the system will not work. So in order for performance management to work, it has to be adopted by the executive team and by everybody else in the organization. In addition to that, the process has to be easy to manage. Information has to flow back and forth in an easy way, because if it's difficult, guess what? It's not going to get done. It needs to be collaborative, meaning span across many different people. It must involve customers, suppliers, vendors, up, down, and across the organization. And it needs to be an integrated process so that everything comes together and solves the needs of HR, the needs of managers, the needs of the board, and the needs of the employees. So I love this visual because I think it says a lot about how to bring a process together. But if we were going to break it down just a little bit to look at each of the components, what you see here is that there are many roles in an organization, as you know. We have the executive level that requires a certain view. We have HR that has a lot of process and flow that needs to occur, the facilitators. We have the managers who are overseeing and monitoring the performance. We have the employees who are achieving goals and doing it in a way that adheres to the culture. And then we have just this black box down here called the technology that enables it. Now, we have a timeline, and on this timeline, I'm starting with November, so I'm building you basically an implementation plan of how this looked internally. So what would happen in November is the CEO and the executive team would get together and set strategic and business goals, and they would identify what are those KPIs that we're going to use to evaluate our success that following year. Within that same time frame of November to January, goals are being cascaded to managers, who then can cascade the goals down to employees. This is a very, very important process. In addition to that, you'll see here that those cascaded goals have to be tied to competencies. And those competencies get tied to a development plan. And we have this box between the manager and employee to show that that is something that has to be collaborative between those two entities in the organization for it to be successful. Well, what happens is through that process, what we're able to do with technology or automation is shift those goals, manage the cascading goals, and add the competencies and the development plan into a system that can be used for ongoing, as I said, feedback recognition and status updates. Now, let's think about the program kicking off. What does HR do? Well, they help set those competencies with the managers so that they can facilitate and monitor the performance process across the whole year. As you know, as HR professionals, it's very difficult and time-consuming to send a constant stream of emails about what's upcoming, doing all of the feedback and follow-up. Hey, you have to get this done. Where is it? You know, I need to gather this. I need to get Excel spreadsheets together for each of the quarterly meetings, that sort of thing. Managers, in an ideal state, should be coaching on the attainment of goals and on the competency model. And sometimes you might call your competency model your culture model or your coaching model or your behavior model. Employees and managers are having that ongoing journaling in their career journal so that we are setting expectations and we know what those expectations are throughout the year rather than at the end and we're very surprised. And in addition to that, we're providing for those updates on the goals and the competency development throughout the year so that we can answer the question about probability of meeting the goal and how well we're achieving the goal. That is driven by technology. So if we're able to, through technology, to provide an input to track all of these different components on the strategic business goal attainment, then we are able to drive up into the organization at the executive level a dashboard, and a dashboard that answers those 4 areas that Joel was really concerned about and needed to be able to have answers to on a daily basis. So that's that first part as we're going through. Now, as we said, we also have to have that formal sign-off process. Well, that typically happens in the form of your performance review. So you can see here again between the green and the employees and the purple of the managers, that has to happen. Now, what's happening in that performance review is because we've been tracking it all year, a lot of that data is already there for us to review. So it's basically a sign-off process of the goals and of the objectives, because people are monitoring all the way through, and then you have a formal appraisal at the end, which then can be used to see, are we doing the right things the right way with the right people? Now, as you know, at the end of the year, that information has to get calibrated, because we have to figure out, are we or do we need to change the goals for the next year? Because most organizations don't have a one-year plan. They typically have a rolling plan over 2 years or 3 years. So this feeds nicely into that rolling performance plan, so that we can have a discussion, a fruitful discussion going into that next year again when we start setting strategic business goals and metrics. This process and in a framework like this will help you in your organization, one, to communicate who needs to be involved, what their role is, how things can be cascaded, the timing of things, so that things can happen seamlessly. And technology takes the manual process out of that by automating the workflow and automating the emails and being able to see in real time where you're at as an organization. And we're going to break that down for you to put each of these roles and each of these tasks in perspective, to give you a feel, if you're using a manual process, of how it would look if you were to move forward. And in this case, in Techie Central, the new performance management process could only be achieved with technology, and technology equates to automation. So Sarah did her due diligence, and she looked at the market, and she looked at all her competitors, and based on the needs that she had with her team and her executives, she selected Performance by Talent Guard to change the conversation. Remember, it was all about moving the needle. And she also liked that it was easy to use and focused on performance management from that strategic goal level all the way through appraisal. So let's talk about, and let's start with that ultimate goal. And what you will see on each slide, if you look at the top of the slide here, you can see executive and you can see technology. We've color-coded it so that you know how this process impacts each of those roles along the way. So the ultimate goal could look something like this, and you're just seeing snapshots of what our next release of our talent management suite looks like. So what you see here is a dashboard, and you can do reporting off this to drive that accountability and transparency. So you can imagine the CEO logging in saying, what are our goals? And as an example, you can see one here, increase revenue by $5 million. That was a revenue goal. Reduce turnover by 5%. That's an HR-related goal. What has to happen is the CEO wants to have visibility into the executive team, what they're responsible for, within sales, marketing, finance, operations, HR. These teams or these groups or departments are all set by the organization's administrator. And then we keep it simple. Yellow is you're on track, green is you've achieved, and red is you're not on track. And so we want to just keep it simple. It has to be easy to look at and easy to use. So in a quick synopsis, CEO can look at this and then drill down into each of these areas to investigate the why or the what. So let's look at that. Okay, so if I started clicking down, you're going to see here, I clicked down into one of the goals. The goal you can see here, I'm logged in as this is me, and this is my dashboard on my goals. The increased revenue by $1 million was cascaded down to me, so that's my portion as an independent business unit. That's what I'm responsible for. It was given a weight to me of 50% of my performance plan, and based on my team's level of achievement, I'm on target. I can see what's been completed, and I can go edit it if I want to. Now, what you can see in just a quick snapshot, if I open this up, this expand or collapse, is I have 4 direct reports that are directly responsible for this $1 million goal. For example, we can see Cassidy. She updated her goal about 6 minutes ago. She's responsible for increasing revenue in Northeast by 100K. She is 100% there on the goal. I can go look at the comments that she and I have had, and I'll show you that momentarily, or I could go add more detail if need be. And if you scan across, you're going to see, uh-oh, I have a problem. Frank obviously is falling behind. So it's my job as a manager to go figure out, because I've cascaded it down and now I'm able to track that, what's going on. So I can take corrective action to get it back on track. So let's use Frank as an example. So I click into his plan. What you're able to see is, you can see this is his goal. As we said, increased revenue by 100K in Texas. I gave him a weighting of 50%. This goal is tied to my department goal. So we have a trail, increased revenue by $1 million, and a company goal, increased revenue by $5 million. Now what's great about this is the employee can see specifically how his or her contribution is directly related to the achievement of the corporate goal. So that's really important to employees. As you know, they hear it all the time. What am I working on? What are the expectations? I don't know where I fit in. I don't know how I impact the goals. Here it is. And revenue usually is the easiest to explain because it's the easiest to quantify. But what we see is we had a start date and a due date and a check-in date. There's a comment box. Now, when I start seeing the dialogue, the comment history between Frank and I, what you're going to realize, oh, Frank is new. He had to take over. He took over a failing division, and he's just now coming up to speed. So I have an area where I can track things that can't be deleted, and that dialogue is going to stay there for history, so I can always go back and look. And I'm not going to talk about the bottom half yet, but we can see that he agrees he's 40% and I agree. But there are things, because of what we've realized in going through this plan, that there are some developmental areas that Frank needs to address. So I'm going to link into his development plan, which allows for feedback, recognition, and status updates. And so if I look at his development plan, there are a couple of things that he needed to improve in order to move the needle, if you will, based on his interim review from the past year. He needed to increase executive presentation and communication skills. We can see where he's at. We've got people, employees in the company who can like that specific goal or who can comment on the goal, and I'm going to break this down in a deeper level momentarily. I wanted him to go through some formal sales training, and he wanted to work on a task force because he wanted to improve his specific skills in the leadership area and have more impact, because he felt that the CRM system wasn't giving him what he needed, so we can track that. Now, if we drill down and I click in that edit goal, what we're able to see is here's the goal. We can again see where he's at. Now, employees are going to have multiple different types of development plan goals. For example, this one is a performance goal. They may have a career goal. And the way that information gets into your development plan is it comes in as a result of your performance review. For example, if you have a rating scale of 1 to 3, we can say anything that's a 3 or lower automatically populate the plan. Or, in this case, Frank can add goals or I can add goals. So it allows for a lot of flexibility in how that gets done. And what we see here is we see this box called development option. Well, we know it has to do with presentation or communication. So what happened was Frank went in and typed the word presentation and he hit select, and that presentation skills came up. And then what happens is a box pops up and says, here are all of the relevant training resources that are available to you to help you close the gap in this area. And so Frank is able to select from those, and you can see here he selected a Dale Carnegie training that he can now link to and a communication training. And we can dialogue on this. You can see I gave him some feedback about the Dale Carnegie, that it was a great course and the entire executive team went through it. People can come in and like it. They can give them feedback, and I'm just showing two forms of feedback. Many people can say, here's something else that I did in terms of presentation, and then we can begin to endorse that skill for him as he develops it over time. So just a nice, clean way that we can go in and really monitor and let employees know that we're watching, we're engaged, and we're listening. So what does that lead up to? As we said, you need to have that interim check-in process. Some people use this, some people don't. It's an option. You can check it on or off, but I always feel that it's good. And the way that Techie Central used it was they specifically wanted an interim process to check on goals, the goals that had been set, and that's it. It wasn't a competency thing at that point. So we needed to have an easy way to see what those goals were, so these show up in the window automatically. We get to see whether it was a corporate, a department, a performance or career goal, so we know the types of things that are being worked on, where they're at, and then with whatever your rating scale is, I'm able to rate it and then sign off on it. And so there's my check-in. Employees know where they are again. I know where they are. HR can log in and see where they are. Executives can see where we are. And again, what does this do? It drives decisions so we can take corrective action. It enables that ongoing performance management. So just to kind of click that, if I would have clicked on one of those goals, what I'm able to do is it will bring me back into the goal window and to see the interim mid-year review, the employee's comments, the grading I gave him, the manager's comments, and so it's always there. Again, we have that tracking that'll never go away for as long as that employee goes there. And even if the employee leaves and we deactivate them, if we turn them back on, they have it. What else does it do? Well, we know that employees can move internally within groups. If I just slide that employee over to another manager, that new manager has all that information at their fingertips, which goes a long way into helping that manager get familiar with where that employee is. In addition to that, we hear all the times, employees want to be able to develop their careers. They need tools for career development. A career journal is a great way to help employees elevate the management of their own career. So what sorts of things do I want to make notes on? What sorts of things interest me? Where do I want to upload documents so that I can show notable achievements or certificates or things of that nature, things that I just want to show off and things that I want to keep track of to enable me over time, make notes of failures, reflecting accomplishments, things of that nature. I can do that in my window, and you can see here, it's usually the journal. It can be based on a competency area, or it can be nothing in particular. It could be a general comment. But I want to, as an example, today I visited with Prospect X with Frank and noticed he was uncomfortable asking the customer for a close. I can note it. I can make it manager only. That means that I'll have it in my journal, but I won't be able, but Frank will not be able to see it in his, where I can keep close notes on that. I could also leave it open where the employee could see it. But what we can see here, here's the area. I posted it. I kept it private. Here's some information. And then I can just go back over time and see, are patterns happening? And if so, as a manager, what can I do about them? And it's great when you have it on paper or in the system. And as we said, the final checkout process, so HR theoretically behind the scenes would have made sure that the performance appraisal template or templates, the rating scale, all of those sorts of things were happening behind the scenes. And now it's time to release it so that we can really see how did we do against the goals and how did we do against the competencies. In the final appraisal, yours might look like this, where it has 1 to 5 rating. You might want to have, your competencies all in one box, or you might want these independently tracked. You can do that. You can make comments on some or on none of the information. It's all flexible. They wanted to keep theirs simple, and they had 10 areas, and that was it to close out the appraisal process. Then you need to have, as HR needs to have, as you know, there's some compliance that goes along with it, and we see the HR orange bar here. We have to be able to close out. And once we close out, we're closing out on accountability, transparency, and continuous feedback, but these things can carry on to the next year. So we have a simple closeout process based on objectives that we said, those were the goals, the development plan, the career journal, the interim review, and the assessment. These can all be turned on or off. And what we can see here is the HR and executive team said, even though these components are part of the performance management process, the things that matter to the organization the most are the goals and the final assessment. So they gave it a weighting of 50-50, which then adjusts the score, which then adjusts the rating, and then automatically will populate what's that adjusted score rating. a score, and then what is the overall rating. So these will be populated, and then people have an area to formally sign out and then sign off, and then it's time stamped. And then you can go and you can print your pretty reports. Even before you do final sign-off, you can print the actual performance review. You can sit down with the employee. You can talk about it as a final sign-out if that's something that has to happen. But we have it. We have a historical record. We can use that data to then plan for the next year, as we said in that formal sign-out for that calibration. So, but what we know is process is only half of the equation, right? It's good to have a process, but we've got to have that buy-in. So let's bring it back to what Joel needed and see if we answered the questions and had the necessary process, tasks, and technology in place to be able to do so. So if you remember, there were 4 areas that Joel wanted to be able to answer at any given time. What is our progress against the company goals? Well, the dashboard provides that. What is the probability that we will meet the goal this month, this quarter, this year? That is the goal tracking component. How are we performing against the goals? That is the interim review and the career journaling. And who and what skills must be developed to ensure that we continue to achieve this year's goals and that we can meet the future goals. And we have the appraisal and the development plan. Now, what I don't mention in here is now that we have all of that big data, if you want to say that, the performance data, that data updates the employee's talent profile. So each year that talent profile is getting better and better and richer, so that if, for example, you wanted to turn on a succession module, you could find talent within your organization with specific goal attainment, specific competencies, with specific proficiency levels, and do your talent planning for the following year to see who do we have internally that would be good to meet the future talent gaps, or where might we have to go external. So you can have a very well-rounded picture. So what data internally now does Techie Central have that they didn't have in the past as a result of the new process, the automation, and the focus on goals? Well, as you know, the old saying goes, what gets measured gets done. So from a strategic perspective, right, here are some things that they now know. They know the goals with the highest probability of being achieved. They have goals with a high probability of slipping. And what does that do for us? Well, it enables us to make decisions about the organization. What needs to be changed so we can get back on track? Who is performing against the goals? That can be broken down by divisions, by teams, and by individuals. Who is not performing against the goal at a very strategic level? Is it a certain department? Is it a certain business unit? Is it certain individuals? How well, so it's not only that we know who is and who isn't, but how well are we doing outstanding across the board, or are we all doing mediocre? Then what it finally tells us is, if I look across all data and I'm looking at some of that appraisal information, what is it going to tell me? Well, if I'm looking at it at an organizational level and I say, show me everything from a 3 and under, let's say 1's not good and 5 is excellent. Show me everything with a 3 and under on all the competencies of where we need help. Wow, you're going to see a lot of holes. So for example, if I say show me communication and I look at all the different indicators, I'm going to be able to see specifically where we're at as an organization and where our holes are, because it might be an organizational learning thing that we need and not necessarily an individual development initiative that's required. So we can see both strength and weakness. From a, I'm going to call it tactical perspective, and these are things that we want to know because it tells us how good we're doing as a management team. What's the percent of high, average, and low performers? What does it look like from a distribution standpoint? What's the percent completion of performance appraisals, right? We all want 100% completion. We know we're not going to get there, but we can look and figure out where are we breaking down in the system, and is it a certain division team manager, and where do we need to add emphasis? the percent of employees with development plans. If we want to be a development and coaching culture, that requires a development plan. So how many employees are using their plan? And then again, how many are achieving those plans? Because if we're not achieving the plans, how are we acquiring new skills to move the company in the future? And another example, and these are just some examples, percent of managers contributing feedback on goals and development plans. So let's look at our most active managers, and does that directly correlate to performance within that team? So having that type of information, again, gives you a different data set that you can look at to then, again, make decisions about what managers do we want to rise up in the organization, which managers could be good mentors, things of that nature. So that concludes the 5 strategies to conquer your performance management process. Just a couple of notes before we go into Q&A. I would highly suggest you to go look at our upcoming webinar page. We have a lot more webinars like this. We have them every 3 weeks, and they typically build on one another with different types of case studies for different size organizations. I'm also interested in hearing what you want to know about, because if there's a case study that I can put together that directly relates to your company, I've been known to do that in the past. In addition to that, there are 20 or 30 or so past webinars that we've done in all the different areas of talent management that may be able to help you as you continue to evolve your strategy. If you are interested in learning more about our tool and how it may be able to help you in a very specific manner, simply request a demo. It's that easy. And just as a high-level note, we are, like I said, a suite company, and we actually have an applicant tracking that we've added on. We have performance management, which you've seen some of the new release screenshots today. We have succession planning. We have an individual development tool. We have our LMS. We have career pathing, one of the most unique modules in the industry. And of course, we have our 360 Insights that fosters a lot of benchmarking and development. So without further ado, what I'd like to do is open it up for questions if you have them. And it can be about anything. It can be about the slides. It can be about your specific process. Simply chat it to me, and I will see if I can answer that. So I have one question from Melanie, and she wants to know how long did it take to get a process up and running. And let me break that down into 2 answers. There's the process of designing how it should work within your specific organization. So what should those boxes look like? And kind of if we go back to this slide, let me just do that real quick. Boom. Let me just slide down here. This slide here, if we're thinking about this process, thinking about what your timeline looks like is important. And we started November, where the planning happens. We know that some people start their review programs in September, some do them in February, some have rotating schedules. It really is looking at what is best for your company, designing that ideal process first and foremost, getting sign-off on that, educating your company about that process. Coming up with something like that, you're talking about 30 to 45 days. But when we start looking at the technology box, how do we automate it? Our shortest implementation time, I'd say, is 3 weeks. Our longest is probably 30 days. And the things that are important to that are, does your organization already have goals that can be implemented in the system? Are these goals that need to be developed? How well do we know where they cascade down? Do you already have a performance review form that you like? Do we have to design one for you? Does your performance review reflect only behaviors, or do they reflect behaviors and goals? So those sorts of things need to be answered first, and then we fine-tune the system to cater to the process that you want. Any other questions? No? Well, if we don't have any questions, then I will call this a sign-off. As I said, we will post this presentation online on our website it'll be under past webinars, but we'll send out a link so that it's easier for you to download. And I am happy to answer any of your questions if you want to send them to me privately. Also, feel free to link in with me if you want to. I strongly encourage it, and I hope that you have a wonderful day. Thank you very much.